9/11 Media Studios presents the Layover with LAAPOA. I'm your host, Marshall McClain. Created by an act of Congress, the New York, New Jersey Port Authority came into being on April 30th, 1921. Its mission was to oversee the creation of vital infrastructure to serve the metropolitan region. In June 1928, the Port Authority Police Force was created when 40 men were selected to police the Goethals Bridge and Outer Bridge Crossing. As the Port Authority facilities increased in number, so did its police force. With the opening of the Holland Tunnel in 1927, the three metropolitan airports Newark, LaGuardia, and JFK, and marine terminals in 1940s, the force grew rapidly. In the 1950s and 60s, with the metropolitan area moving more toward mass transportation, the Port Authority bus terminal opened and the Port Authority assumed control of the PATH train system. Today, the Port Authority Police Department numbers over 2,200 and has expanded to excel in transportation and counterterrorism policing. It is currently the largest transit police department in the country, overseeing the safety of one of the biggest transit hubs in the world. Today, we are joined on the layover by retired 27-year Port Authority police officer Bobby Egbert. Bobby currently serves as the Public Information Officer for the Port Authority Police Benevolent Association, the union representing Port Authority police officers. He is also a 9/11 World Trade Center first responder veteran. Welcome to Layover with LAAPOA. I'm your host, Marshall McClain. Today is a special interview here. We're going to talk a little bit about American Police Beat, and being that it's a National Suicide Prevention and Awareness Month, and we're 21 years after the tragic effects of 9/11. Today we have with us Bobby Egbert. Welcome to the show, Bobby.
Thank you, Marshall. Great to be here, and good to see you.
Absolutely. It's been a while. So let's jump right into it. So how long have you been a cop, and what was your highest rank?
I was a police officer for 27 hard, difficult years.
But well rewarded, right?
Oh, incredibly! It's just it's a great career. It's misunderstood, but if sometimes I often wonder or think that in order to know what police work is, you have to be a police officer. It's not a TV show.
And there's a lot of TV shows out there, some good, some bad.
Well, it's funny you say that because. Whenever I'm in my backyard with my neighbors or something like that, and the subject of law enforcement comes up, I have to keep my mouth shut because my experience doesn't count because I don't watch television. And these people, they know all about it because they watch television. But ours is not a 30 or 60-minute job. Yeah. It takes a lot longer than that.
Yeah, you can't just cut to commercial, right?
Yeah, right.
Well, so you've got a unique experience by the fact that you're also with the PBA. Tell me a little bit about working with the police union and being a cop as well.
Well, I served as a union representative for probably more than half my career, okay. As a delegate, trustee, and I finished up as the chairman of the board of trustees. My education's in journalism, and for a split second, I worked as a journalist prior to becoming a police officer. I took on the responsibility of the media relations, and we never really had an effective media relations platform in our union, and a lot of unions don't. They wait for the media to come to them, and then they answer their questions. So I took that on. Wasn't part of my elected responsibilities, but it's something I did. When I decided to retire, we had general elections coming up. I didn't want to run again because I didn't want to block somebody who might be seeking my position. So I told the boss, the union president, Paul Nunziato, who you're...
I know Paulie.
Yes, you know him well. And he told me, quite frankly, he said, well, we don't want to lose the media thing you do, so they made me an offer I couldn't refuse. And I moved up my retirement 9 months.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, what you're doing is phenomenal. Our group and others are still trying to emulate what you started there. I think it's invaluable of, like you said, not waiting for the media to come to you and being out in front of it and trying to shape that. How large of an agency is the Port Authority Police Department?
Currently, I believe it's between 23 and 2,500 members right now.
Okay.
And of that, I think just a little over 2,000 are the rank of police officer, the workers.
That's pretty big. Tell me what's unique about or the differences between the Port Authority Police Department as opposed to the Big Brother NYPD, and how your jobs differ and what your responsibilities are compared to theirs. Because I know a lot of people, we get this experience at working in LA, they assume everybody's LAPD. You get that on the East Coast where everybody thinks everyone's NYPD?
Yes. They are the big gorilla in the room.
Yeah.
And in my job dealing with the media, I often say to reporters, you guys think there's only two police departments in this country, the NYPD and the LAPD. The second largest one, Chicago, isn't even on your radar.
Right.
All right? There's 18,000 police departments in this country. We're all trained the same way. We all do the exact same job. There's no difference. I always, when I speak to reporters, they'll say, "Well, was the PD there?" I say, "You mean the Port Authority PD?"
Yeah.
And they go, "Oh yeah, that's right. I'm talking to you."
Yeah.
They forget. But the difference between us and the NYPD, you're right. Everybody thinks we are NYPD. We work in New York City. The difference is we also work in New Jersey.
Right.
We're sworn in 2 states. I don't know if we're the only department, but we're unique in law enforcement.
Right.
Where every Port Authority police officer is sworn in 2 states, has total, complete police officer powers in both states. The downside of that is you have to know the laws of both states.
Right.
Now, there's only a river that divide them, but the procedural laws, the criminal laws are totally different.
Yeah.
And especially when it comes to testing for promotions and things that, you might spend your whole career working on the New York side of the river,
Okay.
but you have to know the Jersey material. The other, New York City, listen, I think they're probably the best police department in the country.
Okay.
With the services they provide. They're kind of big. They're unwieldy. The problem I see with them, which is probably true of most police departments, is how they treat their employees.
Right.
And that's another issue. We're talking about September being Mental Health Month. You can't talk about that in a law enforcement sense without speaking of the stress that people speak of being a police officer. Well, the stress is not what we face on the street.
Right.
And you know that through your career. That's why we're police officers. I don't want to say we enjoy it, but that's why we took on this responsibility. The stress is inside. It's the administration. It's the constant damned if you do, damned if you don't.
Yeah.
And that's what policing's all about. You have to make the decisions when you're on the job, in the incident, and in a split second you have to make the decision to do whatever has to be done. There are many that will say it was a wrong decision, but they weren't there. They didn't have the split second to make that decision.
Right.
So that's the stress of police work. It's what goes on in the administration. If I probably had to change one thing, it would be more of an understanding by the department of what their employees face. And they seem to forget that as they move up the ladder.
Right. And so not just the decisions you made, but having to live with those decisions later and being second guessed, triple guessed, and all of the aftermath of that, good, bad, or indifferent.
Marshall, the second guessing is a big problem.
Yeah.
Because the first person that second guesses you is yourself.
Yeah.
We're always wondering if we did the right thing. And that goes back to the administration again. Am I going to be disciplined for this? Is it going to cost me money? Will I be suspended? On my job, and I think this is pretty common in most jobs, they'll hand out 10-day rips. Rips we call a suspension.
Right.
Which can be a $4,000 or $5,000 fine.
Yeah.
And when you think about it, and I always say, as a union rep, I used to say to the bosses all the time, you can commit homicide in this city and not be fined that much money. And for minor infractions,
right.
And it's usually just behavioral things. You didn't address somebody's ma'am or sir,
right.
Or a member of the public, didn't like the way you spoke to them. We're allowed to have bad days. All right, and that happens. We're human.
Absolutely. So can you share a little bit about your experiences into this article about leading up to 9/11, the aftermath of that, and how your department has changed as a result of that?
Well, before I get into that, let me go in a little bit on why I wrote that article.
Oh, please do.
I've been fortunate. American Police Beat has given me a platform to practice my beginning craft of journalism, writing. I know their September issue is the mental health issue, but September for law enforcement is the World Trade Center. There's no question about that. The losses we law enforcement suffered were the largest in the history of American law enforcement.
Right.
I never wrote anything about my experiences on September 11th. I never speak about it. When people ask me, when they find out I was there on September 11th, they always want to know, well, what was it like? And my only response has ever been, well, it was a difficult day. Never really went into it. I thought the time was right to write something. And what I wanted to do was keep it in line with the Mental Health Month issue.
Okay.
And I thought my story probably blended well with that, because I don't have much recollection of the entire day I was on scene. My story is not about heroics or courage. It's about a cop who was scared, who was petrified, but performed, as we all did. And in the story I write, that I was told by a psychologist, the brain is an amazing organism, and it quite often protects us from horrible things. And I've spoken with many other police officers from that day, and they've relayed the same thing to me, that they have a hard time remembering everything. But that day, everybody always starts talking about that day, about on the East Coast, what a beautiful day it was. And September on the East Coast is beautiful. There's no question about it. Not a cloud in the sky. I was assigned to bicycle patrol that day. Something I totally enjoyed. I was actually on a vehicle stop. Yes, I did make vehicle stops on a bicycle. And started hearing some radio chatter that was a bit unusual. They were using codes that we generally don't hear, about explosions and things like that. And then I became aware that the World Trade Center, a plane crashed into the World Trade Center. So I headed right back to the police station. In the article, I wrote that when where my police station was located, we had a line of sight view of the World Trade Center. So as I was entering the police station, in a back entrance, I looked and I saw a huge explosion. I assume that might have been the second plane hitting. my command was mobilizing, sending all that they could to the World Trade Center. We have a precinct at the World Trade Center.
Right.
We've always had a precinct there. And later on, I'd like to tell you the story about the World Trade Center police stations. But we were all on the garage floor in the police station, and a lieutenant gathered us all, made us sign just a legal pad, just a name, who we were, that we were going down there. And then he told us all. He made us take a breather for a bit. He said, listen, most of you have been through 93 at the World Trade Center. This appears to be much worse. Be safe, stay together, and just God bless you all. And, it's funny because later on, probably a couple months later, I was speaking to that lieutenant, and he had stayed at the command. I mean, we still had policing to do.
Right.
And he always felt bad about that. And I told him, I said, Lou, you don't realize what you did that day. You saved a lot of lives. Just the fact that you did what a commander should do is gather his troops, calm them down, tell them what they're going into. It's not going to be pretty, to be safe. What you did was save lives. That delay in getting to the scene helped people live. And I know he had to hear that. We lost 37 police officers that day from my department. New York City lost 23. And then, of course, there's that unimaginable number of 343 New York City firefighters,
right,
plus other law enforcement officers. Total on that day, 72 law enforcement officers were lost. The largest single loss of police officers, and the 37 Port Authority police officers is the largest single loss any one police department has ever suffered in a single incident in the history of American law enforcement.
Did you also lose quite a few supervisors as well? So even your management of your department changed overnight?
The department was decimated. We lost the superintendent of police. A lot of people think that a lot of the people we lost is because some people think our headquarters might have been there. No, our headquarters is across the river in Jersey City. We've always had a precinct at the World Trade Center.
Right.
The superintendent was killed. My commanding officer, I was assigned to the JFK Airport Command. My commanding officer, Anthony Infante, was a full police inspector, was killed trying to make rescues. The Captain Kathy Mazza, the commanding officer of our police academy, which was also in Jersey City, was lost. Her story is an incredible story of heroics. Kathy was a bulldog of a person and a sweetheart at the same time. And she was also a registered nurse. And her specialty was cardiac care. And she led a team of police officer academy instructors to the World Trade Center, and they were rescuing many people. They had one woman in a rescue chair who couldn't walk. They were in the lobby of, I think it was the North Tower, trying to get her out. The South Tower had collapsed. Captain Mazza knew what was coming. People were still trying to get out desperately. She drew her service weapon, and the lobbies of the World Trade Center had these huge panes of glass, of windows.
Okay.
And she started shooting them out to have extra,
To extricate people.
to avenues for them to escape.
Right.
And it worked. And then she told the cops she was with to leave, to save themselves. And the ones I spoke to, they didn't want to. But Kathy demanded that they leave. And she stayed with that woman. And her body was recovered with that woman's body. Incredible heroics. Incredible heroics. And you talk about selfless actions. I believe that Kathy Mazza knew her end was coming, but she wasn't going to leave that person, because she swore an oath as a registered nurse and she swore an oath as a police officer, and she lived that oath.
It's amazing.
And then, so we mobilized from our command, hectic ride to the World Trade Center. Our entrance to the World Trade Center, to Lower Manhattan, was the Brooklyn Battery Tunnel. As we were entering the tunnel, right before we entered it, one of the prominent figures that stood over the tunnel on the New York side were the Twin Towers.
Right.
As soon as you came out of the tunnel, you were basically at the Twin Towers.
Right.
And we saw the collapse of the first tower.
As you're riding it.
As we were entering the tunnel.
Wow.
And a sergeant who was with the squad I was with, all he said was, "We just lost a lot of people." I couldn't comprehend that at all. We entered the tunnel. Halfway through, and the tunnel was closed at this point to only emergency vehicles.
Okay.
Halfway through, we were met with the clouds that everybody's seen of debris. Couldn't go any further. Debris was flying by us. It was amazing. Couldn't see, couldn't breathe. And then all of a sudden, people started emerging out of the cloud. And I'm thinking, what's going on here? And I thought, okay, they probably left their vehicles and they're trying to escape. No, these were people who were escaping from Lower Manhattan. This was their only route.
Okay.
So we got the people out. Got them all the way back to Brooklyn. The vehicle we were in was a sort of like a mini bus,
Okay.
Police bus.
Right.
And one of the things we talk about as police officers is suffering from tunnel vision. Never experienced that in my life until that day. And it was getting my Scott Air Pack on. I was so intent, and all I saw was my trying to get this on. And all of a sudden, I was hit by something. It was a sergeant, a big burly sergeant, who hit me as if he was a tackle and pushed me out of the way. And as he did that, the vehicle we were in was speeding backwards.
Oh, wow.
And, couldn't see, obviously. So I was very grateful for getting hit that hard. And I understood at that point what tunnel vision was, because I had no situational awareness. Only I was focusing on that. As we were rescuing people out of the tunnel, squad of New York City firefighters came walking through the tunnel. They were walking from Brooklyn.
Okay.
They joined us. We all got into the vehicle and exited the tunnel just about as the second tower was coming down. The landscape we emerged into was totally devoid of color. It was just the smoke, the gray, nothing. It was unlike anything you can imagine. Strange sight I saw was when we exited the tunnel, we come up to an intersection on West Street, and there was still a traffic cop there performing his duties. And in the article I mentioned, it's just a strange juxtaposition between his official duties and this alternate reality he was in, and just standing there, still trying to perform his job.
Yeah.
A real cop. And we got as far as if you're familiar with the old World Trade Center complex, they had these pedestrian bridges that cross West Street. Got up to the south pedestrian bridge. We were stopped by what's referred to as the pile, the remains of the World Trade Center.
Okay.
And squad broke up. Some repositioned themselves. The ones I stayed with, we did what we were taught. We set up a command post. We had no communications, and then we just immediately started helping, working with firefighters, uncovering people and things like that. From that moment on, I don't have a lot of recollection. And Marshall, understand, I was on site for 8 hours at that point, beyond that point.
Right.
I don't have a lot of recollection. I spoke, I wrote about speaking later, days later, maybe weeks later, to people about this. Mm-hmm. About, I remember seeing a landing gear on West Street. So I mentioned that to somebody, and
just the landing gear of the plane.
Of a plane, yeah.
Of one of the planes.
Well, I worked at an airport. I know what a landing gear looks like.
Right.
And I said to to this one detective sergeant, I said, "We mentioned a landing gear." He says, "Yeah. Do you remember all the body parts around it?" I told him, "No, I don't recall that at all." And it didn't bother me because I thought, well, there was more than one airplane, and more than one landing gear. Who knows? Sometime later, I was speaking with a cop that I was with that day, and I mentioned that landing gear story to him. And he looked at me, and I said to him, I said, "Did you see any body parts?" He looked at me with total disbelief. He said, "Bobby, there was body parts all over the place." He says, "The fence, there was a construction fence that separated north and southbound lanes of West Street. There was some work going on there, I guess." So he said, "You were up and down that fence. Don't you remember the arms sticking out?" And I said, "No." I said, "Not at all." He goes, "Bobby, there were body parts all over." And even going back to that landing gear, that detective sergeant said you couldn't get anywhere near it without wading through body parts. So I have no recollection of that whatsoever. Nothing. And what I learned about what we were doing that day was just told to me by people who said, "No, Bobby, you were doing this, you were doing that, you were doing this." I still don't have the recollection of that. And there was a time later, it was about my last definitive recollection is basically when the second tower came down. So that was like 10:15 in the morning. It was about 5 p.m. We finally made it to my department's command center, which was north of the Trade Center, set up at Manhattan Community College on West Street.
Okay.
And so that whole period of time, I don't know what went on. We entered it was set up in the gymnasium of the college. We entered the gym and people were looking at us like we're ghosts.
Was that where the triage was set up?
Yeah, right, okay. The command center. And we were covered obviously in all the ash and everything. We probably looked like ghosts.
Yeah.
And we were told we were listed as missing. And I remember saying, "No, feel me, I'm real, we're here." At this point, I remember being, and I have definite recollection of that part. And I, we're in a gymnasium, totally exhausted. And I lay down on a bleacher. All of a sudden, everybody starts running out of the gymnasium. What's going on? They said, "World Trade Center 7's coming down." I didn't even move. In my mind, I said, "I don't want to see another building come down." And that was it. Then we were still on the scene until, probably early in the morning, and it was just, and then we started learning about our brother and sisters that were killed. And, Marshall, I was on the job about 16 years that day. I was with a big police department. And I always felt fortunate. During that time, we didn't lose one single police officer. We had a few shot. A couple of my friends were shot. We had a lot of officers suffer career-ending injuries and other types of injuries, which is, I hate to say it, but normal for our work.
Right.
But everyone survived. And then in a few moments, in one incident, 37 of my brothers and sisters were killed. It's still difficult to comprehend, and this is 21 years later. But I'll never forget it, and I would never want to forget it.
Right. I mean, you have officers or agencies that lose, one officer in the line of duty, or maybe two, but to comprehend 37 in one action is I can't wrap my head around that. And then, as the after effects of this, you still have had officers die as a result of everything else they were exposed to.
And I'll get into that in a second. Those 37 that died, they weren't doing what I was doing. We were on the outside. When we got on scene, the towers were down. Those officers, like the NYPD officers who died, the firefighters, and others, they were in those buildings.
Right.
They were climbing those stairs, knowing their survival was uncertain. Those are the heroes, and I refer to them as God's heroes also. Mine was a day of being scared and being petrified. And I speak about that in the article because I wanted people to know that that's a normal reaction.
Right.
And when I remember a young officer pulled his radio car next to mine sometime later, said, "Bobby, is it okay to be scared?" And I, as a union representative, I knew I had to answer him honestly. And I said, "Yeah, I'm really petrified." And when I started speaking like that with other cops in the station house, all of a sudden people, I saw people would open up. So I let everybody know how petrified I was that day. I did my job, and I'm told I did it well, but I was petrified. But 9/11 continues, and for my job, unfortunately, we're still waiting for September 12th. We haven't moved beyond.
Right.
We have police officers that have suffered horrible cancers that have been attributed to their work at the World Trade Center. And not that just that day, the 9-month recovery period, rescue and recovery period.
Right.
We've lost so far 13 that have been confirmed. We have others that are still suffering. The NYPD and the FDNY have lost a large amount that they've confirmed as post 9/11. So the sacrifice continues.
Can you tell me about Jon Stewart and his role in all this, the actor, comedian?
That surprised me, and many of us like-minded police officers.
Right.
What's called the Victims' Compensation Fund was set up, and a lot of it has to do with what's called the Zagrota bill. A police officer, Detective Zagrota, who died of 9/11 cancer. He was an NYPD detective. Probably was the first person to be identified as suffering from a related illness from his work at the World Trade Center. It appears, I don't know the whole story of how the Victim Compensation Fund evolved, but it is a federal fund, it had to make its way through the houses. And apparently there was some stalling involved there.
Okay.
John Stewart, he carried the hammer for us. He went ahead and was very outspoken. He wanted this bill passed to provide for the people who are suffering, who are not only first responders. The overwhelming majority are just the people who live down there,
right.
work down there.
Right.
And he was the public face that took on Congress. And in a very famous setting in Congress, he excoriated them.
Yeah.
Told them to do the right thing.
Yeah.
Because he knew what the right thing was to do. And he questioned whether they knew.
Yes.
And it was successful. It was passed right after him.
Yeah, if you haven't, those of you who haven't seen it, you should check out that clip on YouTube with John Stewart in Congress. It's something to see, especially contrary to his usual joking and all that. It was pretty impressive. And to your knowledge, does he have anyone in law enforcement or firefighters or relatives? He just did it?
No, Marshall, I don't know if he has any relationships like that. I do not know. I want to believe it was just out of his heart. He saw an injustice being done, and he has a bit of a reputation of being a crusader.
Yeah.
and he carried that ball, man, and he carried it across the line. He did all right. He showed up at many of our affairs. He's become a friend of us, of the New York City PBA, the Fire Department Union, and other associations. He never forgets us. Never.
That's outstanding, and unfortunately sometimes rare with a lot of celebrities these days with law enforcement and the misconceptions, and with that, and being that it is Suicide Awareness Month. Can you talk a little bit about PTSD or PTSI, because of the stigma of it, and how your agency or how the PBA is helping address that?
We're fortunate as a union. We have on staff a stress counselor, psychologist, Peter Clean, who also has an article this month in American Police Beat. Peter was a former Port Authority police officer. He comes from a family of Port Authority police officers. I encourage everybody to read his article in American Police Beat. He talks about his journey. He did leave the police department, became a Franciscan friar.
Oh, wow.
And then continues education and has his doctorate in psychological counseling. So it fell on him. A lot of it fell on him. In the aftermath of 9/11, in the first few years, or 5 years, or 6 years, I know my department suffered about 10 suicides. That's not to say all were 9/11 related. We don't know that at all. What I came to terms with is suicide seems to be a contagion.
Yeah.
We might have had an officer take his life because of the demons he was struggling with from 9/11. Don't know that.
Right.
But that might have happened. Another officer is struggling with his own demons. That has nothing to do with 9/11.
Right.
Family, finances, depression, whatever. But in his mind, because he knows the torture he's going through, his mind, he says, well, that person ended that horror. That's the contagion.
Right.
So he says, I know what I can do to end this. One thing about law enforcement suicide is we readily have the means. Every police officer readily has the means to take his own life. And in that, everyone, not just cops, everyone has certainly had moments of incredible weakness. Mm. And sometimes the demons overpower. So, are the suicides that we suffered after 9/11 all related? I don't know. I believe the contagion of suicide, though, is what happens. Just takes one to end his horror, and others who are suffering view it as a way out. And it's a difficult thing to deal with. I wish there was a way we can determine medically, scientifically, whatever, if a suicide is job related. Because to me, that's definitely a line of duty death. The job caused it. All right. We deal with things every day that the public doesn't deal with.
Right.
I often say, when I write my stories, I've never really written about, other than this 9/11 story, the personal things I've been through. Because I don't think the average person would believe it. Because they would think it's embellishment or fiction. They don't know what it's like to be on a scene and see a person's head split open, or the smell of burnt flesh. They just have no concept what that is. So why write about it if no one's going to believe it?
Or
but
understand.
The audience I try to write for, law enforcement, they understand it completely.
So I know you've got a couple of sons, and I know that this is near and dear to your heart in terms of the stressors of the job, and how PTSD, most people know what that is now. There's been kind of a re-education to call it PTSI instead of being a disorder, calling it an injury to try to remove the stigma. I know we talked off camera a little bit about how some agencies are shying away from the military because of the stigma that they just assume that because you're in the military, you're going to have some level of PTSD or PTSI. Can you talk a little bit about that and some of the things you're doing with the Police Unity Tour to raise awareness as well as your sons?
Well, thank you for bringing up my two boys. I'll always speak of them. Let me start by saying, in the aftermath of September 11th, my two sons were not the type to pontificate about we should do this, we should do that, they should do this, they should do that. My two boys said, they stepped across that line and said, no, I can do something about this. And they did. My younger son, Daniel, was a Marine for 7 years, was injured. He's fine today. My oldest son became an Army Special Operator. So there's a lot about him we don't know. But they went ahead and they did what they thought was right. And I always say, you have to respect your enemy. There's no question about that. And as much as I hate to say this, on September 11th, the enemies of this country planned and executed perfectly. We can't take that away from them. We got our asses kicked that day. There's no question about that. We were unprepared. My anger is we have military units all over the world protecting other countries. On that day, we couldn't protect our own. Because of my profession, I've always felt responsible for what journey my two boys have chosen to go off to war. I thank God they're fine today. But we can never forget the young women and men who went overseas, and more than even the score, but have never come home. And there's something deep inside of me that makes me feel responsible for that, makes me feel guilty about that. And maybe it has to do with just the total unpreparedness of the system I was involved in. And when I say the system, I mean not just the police department, just the government itself. Now, Marshall, airport policing is incredibly difficult. But you know as well as I do, September 11th wasn't a screening issue.
Right.
It was an intelligence failure.
Right.
But we tend to focus on the wrong things, you know, and we dismantled a lot of private industries.
Yes.
And developed this government bureaucracy.
Yes.
That a lot of people won't understand this and won't agree with me. I didn't see any necessity for a change because I knew what the problem was. Just like every Port Authority police officer on their way to the World Trade Center that day, or that were working at the World Trade Center, we knew immediately that this was a terrorist incident. We were there for '93 when they blew up the World Trade Center. My police department's been the only department in this country that's been personally attacked by terrorists.
Hey, Bobby, can we talk a little bit about the Police Unity Tour, your role in that, how much money you've raised, just the whole background on that?
Well, as you know, I was a bicycle cop, and the person who started our Police Unity Tour chapter, the New York chapter, that we named after the 37, Chapter 37, he was a bicycle cop also, but he was in a job-wide unit. So, and whenever he was assigned to my command, we were partnered up. And his name is Tommy Kennedy, recently retired as a sergeant from the Emergency Services Unit. And he said to me, he said, you know, he became aware of this organization, the Police Unity Tour, riding bicycles from New York City to Washington, D.C. over a 3-day period. And the idea is to raise money for the National Law Enforcement Officers Memorial. It's a national monument, memorial created by an act of Congress to honor the fallen American police officers, but it receives no public funding. So the Police Unity Tour is the largest single contributor to it. Year to date, the Police Unity Tour, it's a total of 9 chapters throughout the country, I think has raised between $28 and $30 million, all cops on bikes. When Tommy first came to me about this, and he said, we're going to ride a bike to Washington, D.C., I looked at him and said, Tommy, we work for an agency that owns airports. Can't we just fly there? He said no.
Yeah.
So, and we then, after that first ride, which was the Police Unity Tour always starts on May 9th every year, we formed the New York chapter, Chapter 37. Interesting thing about our chapter, even though it's identified by a geographical location, New York, we have many Southern California police officers in our department. Your department has had many people that are members of our chapter. And that began in the aftermath of September 11th, when planes started flying again. people would, officers from throughout around the country would come out and work on the pile with us.
Right.
And it was just a friendship that just developed with the Southern California cops, and their natural avenue to wanting to ride in the Unity Tour was with the New York chapter, and they've been with us ever since.
Yep.
And we're very fortunate to have them.
Yeah, we have an officer, former Marine, Sophia. We call her Gunny Gallegos, and she's there every year.
She's she's almost. I think she's one of the probably original Southern California people.
Yeah.
She's a big part of Chapter 37. She exudes everything you want in a Marine and a police officer. Yeah. She's always there to help you, and she's just so dedicated to the cause.
Yeah, absolutely. She's on our honor guard as well. She's an awesome person.
Yep.
So, what would you like your agency or your PBA, your association, to be left with? What would you like people to take away with about your time and what you guys have established?
Well, like any police department, I want people to understand that it is selfless work. Being a police officer, you don't become rich. You make a living. It's a difficult and dangerous job. The average person doesn't understand that, and I'll go back to television again. It in no way does it resemble what you watch on television. A police officer will face sheer moments of sheer terror. There's no question about that. Not every day, but you're not going to get through a career without it. What I would like people to know about my police department, because we work in the shadow of the NYPD, that's a 38,000 member behemoth. Total department is over 50,000 with the civilians and everything. We are a much smaller department. We're large as far as police departments in this country, but we're much smaller than them. And what I always like to say about us is we work with a quiet confidence. We don't brag about what we do, we just do it. Transportation policing, certainly airport policing, is very difficult. You are not, for the most part, the old concept of foot patrol still exists in transportation policing. And you're surrounded by thousands of people all the time. And things just explode around you. Many of the jobs you handle, yes, you're dispatched too, because airports and transportation facilities are just incredibly busy places. And unfortunately, they're magnets for criminal activity. Yeah. But you also are constantly, we use the term a pickup. Pickup is a job you just pick up, and constantly busy with those things. The panicked person who comes up to you, the incident that just happens. Again, you're surrounded by this. You have nowhere to hide. Right. Yeah. So I think our legacy, I would hope everybody knows us as, they're not going to make television programs about the PAPD. All right, but that's because we work with quiet confidence.
I like that.
And we're no other police agency does what we do.
Yeah.
And we preserve that very well.
Well said. Now is my favorite part of the program, the lightning round.
Oh boy.
We got 10 questions here. Just what the first thing that comes to your head. Just a quick shout out to the Actor Studio and the late great James Lipton. That's where these questions came from, and I believe he took it from somewhere else as well. So let's start with, what is your favorite word?
I think acceptance. I've learned throughout what I've been through in my career, in my life, it's probably the best gift I can give myself.
What's your least favorite word?
Hate. No place for it.
What turns you on?
Just being with family, my children, my grandchildren. You get to a point in your life where there's just nothing more comforting than family.
Well said. What turns you off?
Arrogance.
What sound or noise do you love?
Again, a happy family. The sound of gatherings. I'm at the point in my life where I have grandchildren too,
yeah.
And our youngest is just turned today 8 months.
Oh.
And just to hear the cooing and stuff, those are incredible sounds.
What sound or noise do you hate?
I have to go back to arrogance. The sound of arrogance, of someone's arrogance. And that covers a lot of things,
yeah.
Marshall.
Yeah.
Hate and discord and things like that. It's there's no place for that in my world.
Okay.
Yeah.
I know you have a few, but choose one. What's your favorite curse word?
Been a cop a long time. A fucking cop. I don't need to say more.
Got it. What profession, other than your own, would you like to attempt?
I would love to be a medical doctor, a surgeon, and just
That's good.
give people new lives.
What profession would you not like to participate in?
Well, that's a tough one. I think the most unrecognized people in our society are our sanitation workers. People might call them garbage men, trash people. Look at the job they do. And they're not compensated nearly enough. We have a crazy society where we pay the people who do the least the most, and the people who really matter the least.
Yep.
And I can't think of anybody other than a sanitation worker. I wouldn't do their job.
Yeah.
It's a difficult job, and it's dangerous. And it's just so important to just healthy, viable communities.
Absolutely. And the last, but I think the most important, if heaven exists, which I believe it does, what would you like to hear God say when you arrive at the pearly gates?
Welcome.
Thank you for your time.